Uh, why did my mouse jump to there? It is. And welcome to another exciting episode of Writing Through the Unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and joining me tonight is a guest who I have the privilege to introduce. This gentleman, and I use gentleman in the kindest of terms. I met him at GSIC, the first one in Florida, and met him in the hallway, and we had a little chat, and I mentioned that my parents were huge fans, so he actually said, let's take a selfie and send him a picture. So that was very cool of him and left a mark on me. So when I started this series, I reached out to him, and he agreed to be, and I'm going to do as he did, first episode. And so that was such a blessing and launched this great series that everyone is on. So with that, I am honored, privileged, and blessed to introduce once again to Writing Through the Unknown, the one, the only, the tall Brad Olsen.
All right. Well, thanks, Michael. Good to be on again. Yeah, I mean, now you're in season 2 here. So I was the very first episode. I guess I'm the alpha to the omega now, but you'll have other guests. And you're on the eTalk network. That's a good friend of ours, Jeff Rennell, and a lot of great content on that network. So you guys are doing some good work out there.
Yes, thank you. And there's even, we were talking backstage, another synchronicity is today is July 24th. And you happen to be my 24th episode of season 2.
There we go. And, right. Yeah. So,
yeah.
Cool. I saw in your introduction, you have Anunnaki and the Giants, and we were talking backstage. You haven't had a guest on who's done that presentation for you yet. So we'll go into the Giants. And also esoteric history. Of course, I'm the author of the 3 books in the esoteric series. And in modern esoteric, I have a chapter called Blood of the Gods. And in my most recent Beyond Esoteric, there is Suppressed Human Origins chapter. So these really are esoteric subjects. They are only known by a select few. There are bones that have been found all around the world, and as we also were talking about pre-show, that there's a concerted effort to cover this up, for the Smithsonian to confiscate the bones and get rid of them or stash them somewhere. And this is part of our history, why it's not being told and why this whole subject keeps getting suppressed is a big mystery. But some people know about it, and certainly archaeologists who come across these giant bones know about it. But it's hard to get funding. That might be a problem. It does upset the apple cart when you're talking about evolution and where we came from, the whole Darwinian model of humans from apes, to throw in a very large hominid concurrent with humans. Well, that rewrites history, doesn't it? So I think there are some concerted efforts to keep this out of the mainstream narrative.
I agree, and I can't help wondering, as I had a guest on, Julia Kamar, about
Oh, yeah.
Tartaria and how tall they were. Could the giants, like we were talking backstage, the ones found in Nevada, the red-haired, could they have been Tartarians who were buried, and that's why they were destroyed?
Well, what is the timeline that Julia gave for Tartaria? Was it pre-Ice Age or was it just a few thousand years ago?
I believe we were talking mainly that they were around the 1800s, 1900s, and they disappeared around World War II.
Okay, so pretty recent then, because these some of these giant bones are thousands of years old, and the ones in northwest Nevada, they were part of an extinct lake there in Nevada called Lake Lahontan. It was a big freshwater lake that at the high level watermark, you have all these caves where they found these giant bones. You have Lovelock Cave where a dozen or more mummified giants have been found, and then there's other locations I went and scoped them out because I live out in that area now. I actually live in the fertile valley of one of the shallower areas of Lake Lahontan, and it's very fertile. Even though Nevada is the driest state, it has water flowing, of course. It's got rivers, it's got springs, it's got reservoirs, and natural lakes. Some of the natural lakes that still remain are a throwback from this much larger freshwater lake that existed during the last ice age, so about 14 to 11,000 years ago. As I said, at the high water mark, they found these mummified, red-haired giants, some as tall as 10 feet tall. And it's quite the enigma because it certainly begs the question, where the heck did they come from? And scientists are still baffled about these skeletons. They're now officially called the Giants of Lovelock or the Lovelock culture because they also created quite a bit of funerary objects as well as their personal items, such as massive 15-inch candles that would have been size 26, 15 inches in length, size 29 even. And just for comparison, retired NBA star Shaq O'Neal, who's 7'1", wears size 22 shoes. And some of these candles they found are size 29. So these ancient artifacts also tell the story of these giants in Nevada.
So I'm wondering, Nevada has Area 51, and is near a lot of the mysteries of the Uinta Basin in Utah. So do you think there's something in that area that drew them there, or could all those mysteries be coming because they were there?
Well, when you have a big freshwater lake with reeds that they wove their sandals and made boats from, you you also have a lot of wildlife that would have attracted people. And I would imagine that during the Ice Age, the weather was much different than it is now. It probably rained a lot more often, had more trees in the area, and was quite a different place from what it is today. But then you also have the red hair, the red tint to the hair. And so then that would suggest more of a Caucasian feature. But because they're so big, Michael, it would appear that these skeletons were an entirely different race altogether. So human-like, but not quite human. And to the Paiute Indians who still live in the state of Nevada, they called these red-haired barbarians Sitika. And that is because they were cannibals. They were these ancient enemies. And when you think about cannibalism, that's when you eat your own species. And it's really dangerous to do that. You'll get weird diseases, just like when they were feeding the cows cow meal and then mad cow disease came about. Same thing would happen with cannibals. If you eat your own species, you get these weird diseases. But in the case of these giants, if they are different, then you can get away with that. It's sort of like the way that sometimes chimpanzees will attack bonobos, which are very similar monkey species, but then the more aggressive chimpanzees will eat the bonobos and not get these weird diseases.
Right. And I can't help wondering how names come about. That CCC is our program for looking into the sky. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name that you mentioned because I'll probably butcher it. But to me, as you were saying it, it sounded like CCC.
Sitika.
So I'm wondering if that's where they got it from.
No. CCC is Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, Center for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This is just an acronym. Sitika meant the barbarian giants. It was just a Native American term.
Yeah, I was just thinking if they were thinking they came from space, that there was correlation and maybe made the acronym to fit that.
No, I don't think so. No. Center for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, search for an extraterrestrial. And they do. They see them all the time up there at Mount Adams. I'm sure you've done a couple shows with UFOs and sightings. Yes. It's all over the place.
Right. And not to sidetrack from the giants, but I remembered watching a video with you and Jeff, and was it in Nevada where the gravity was running uphill instead of downhill?
That's actually out near Jeff Rennell in Salt Lake City.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a gravity anomaly in the Utah Valley there. And we tested it several times, and yeah, balls roll up the hill. Cans roll up the hill, cars roll up the hill. And you know it's going uphill because it's under a bridge. It's under a train trestle. And when you're down underneath it, that's when the gravity starts pulling you up the hill. And so when you're in a car, for example, you're seated and you don't see the lights in the distance, but as you get higher on the hill, you do. So you know for sure it's taking you up the hill as you get a wider range.
Yeah. It was fun watching you guys having the fun playing with the gravity. But so switching back to the giants for a quick second, or I say quick second, it'll probably be majority of the show, depending on where we go with it, is Alaska has a triangle which has a pyramid, which I feel like has a Stargate. Could there be a Stargate also near Nevada, in which case that could be where they came from?
Well, I never really questioned that. It could be, but yeah, isn't it interesting? You have the Area 51 and the Tonopah testing and a lot of black projects that have top secret clearance, all based in Nevada. It's one of the most secretive states as well, and some of the largest military bases, and they're all over. It's not just the Nellis base with Area 51 and Indian Springs. Up near me in northwestern Nevada, you've got Fallon Naval Air Training. You've got Hawthorne, which is the largest Army depot. So it's just miles and miles of these bunkers, huge underground bases in Nevada too. And I would suspect they all interconnect. So it's pretty top secret facilities that are also there too. I don't know about the portal though. That's a new one. That'd be worth looking into.
Right, and there's also the underground tunnels that they have as well. And as you mentioned, the underground bases, I wonder if, I know some people talk about the hollow earth or inner earth. Could the giants have been from there and just happened to be on the surface when they passed and that's why they were buried? Or do you think they actually were living on the surface?
No, I think they lived on the surface. But you bring up a good point, and that is perhaps there was a connection to inner earth. Have you heard of the Kandahar giant? It's a pretty well-known case in the last 20 years that in Kandahar, Afghanistan, they took a big giant down who lived in a cave, and our special forces guys shot him in the eye and killed it, and they had to evacuate it out. So it begs the question: if you got one giant, is it a one-off? Do they live really, really old? I mean, he must have had parents, right? Or perhaps a family of them lives deep in these caves in the inner earth. What do you think about that?
I think it's possible because it might explain why, we have giants in Nevada, giants in Afghanistan. I think there were even reports of giants in the Russian area. And as we're finding them, it's, are they connected? In which case, how would they be? And the only way they could really travel without being seen would be underground. Because, no offense, but if a 10-foot tall being is walking across the ground, gets in the ocean, swims across, someone's going to see it and film it because they're not going to believe their eyes. And so our media would be filled with that. They wouldn't be able to scrub all of that. And so since there's no reports, but then it also would be interesting to see if the giant in Kandahar, if it had red hair as well, in which case that's a trait to the giants, or is it something in Nevada turned their hair red? That, something to look into too.
Yeah, all valid points, and hard to say for sure what they're really all about, and if there are still breeding colonies. I've heard that there are on the island of Sardinia. There are supposed to be a breeding colony, families So it's not just a male and a female and they have some offspring. You have to have several family units so that they can intermarry without intermarrying your own child. It's similar to cannibalism. If you have children with a brother or sister or even a cousin, over time, you're going to have health issues. That's what happened to the pharaohs. They would often intermarry brothers and sisters and to keep the pharaonic line going, and it would result in really horrific and debilitating diseases.
Right, and you would think over time they would figure that out, but apparently they still hadn't, because even in the Middle Ages and in the monarchical system of Europe, they were doing the same thing still to pretty recent times.
Well, you have in your introduction the Anunnaki. Tell me what you think. Who is the Anunnaki?
You know, that is a question I find really interesting, because I have on one hand one guest who says they're the gods and they came from Nibiru, is their home world, and they're a race of beings that came and kind of started messing with mankind and created slave races, and they're pretty much all the gods of that we talk about on our earth are really Anunnakis and could be the same, but that's why the statues were destroyed, was my theory, is to not see they're the same. And then I had another guest who said Anunnaki is like saying American. It's a group of races that group together, and they're just called the Anunnaki. It's a group of star beings.
You think from Planet X or Nibiru?
I feel like Nibiru is attached, but I also wonder if Tiamat might be connected, and if that was truly was destroyed and what created the belt around Mars, then it might explain why we're heading in the same way. If the same people are doing the same things here that they did there, it might explain why the planet is reacting the way it's reacting.
Yeah, good point. So I have a theory of my own based on the evidence, mainly the bones, the skulls, the elongated skulls. You're aware of that, right? Down in Peru, they have the whole museum in Paracas where you can see dozens of these elongated skulls. And I do a presentation at conferences and show people the comparisons. And you can tell that they're not quite human. For one, the skulls are 30% larger cranium capacity, and you can wrap a skull, you can put a board on it, you can deform the skull, but you can't create a larger brain cavity.
Right.
So, yeah. And so it's pretty obvious that they're human-like, but not quite human. The eye sockets are 30% big. The connection to the spinal cord, also bigger. Bigger head, bigger body. There you go. You got giants. Now, the reason I bring up Anunnaki is the question is, well, who the heck were these things? And it's not just in Peru. They found the distribution of these elongateds all around the world. A lot of them have been found around the Black Sea region, Eastern Europe, in Egypt. Queen Nefertiti and the king Akhenaten and their son or nephew, King Tut, were all elongated skulls. So what's going on here? And isn't it interesting that in at least Egyptian culture, they are considered royalty. They are the lords and the humans are the servants. So when you think about them being quite different, well, maybe they were. This is the Anunnaki we're looking at, these elongated skulls. Or just in the same way that you can have a donkey and a horse mate, similar species, but different, and the end result is a mule. Mules are sterile. Mules cannot reproduce. So maybe the same thing happened with earth women. Remember, because the Bible says from the heavens they came, they found the earth women fair, they mated with them, and then they're the men of renown. So either these elongateds could be Anunnaki, or perhaps the Nephilim are their ancestors or their offspring that are half human, half unknown father ET. And indeed, that's exactly what some of the researchers like Brian Forrester, I think Michael Tellinger did a sample of a South African giant. He certainly had a finger bone. Lloyd Pye had the Star Child skull, and Klaus Dana, who found a giant in Ecuador, and they recreated it in Switzerland at Eric von Daniken's museum. In all those cases, they tested some of the living, some of the fragments of flesh, some of the old dried skin, and did a DNA test and found that they all had human mother matriarchal DNA, but unknown father DNA. So that to me suggests that that's what the Nephilim are. They're these offspring of the Anunnakian humans.
That makes sense. And there's a popular photo going around of an Anunnaki who's supposed to be sleeping, who supposedly is going to wake up and is one of the scientists that's supposed to help mankind. And it just, I was just picturing it in my head as, we were talking about the Nevada giants having the red hair. If I'm not mistaken, that photo shows the Anunnaki with red hair.
Oh, yeah. Good point. Huh. Well, there you go. So I was down in South America 5 years ago, and I went to Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. It's in Bolivia, but a couple miles off from Lake Titicaca. It had once been a port town in Lake Titicaca because there are piers and what look like water marks on some of the stones. But it's now 3 miles away, so giving more testament to how old it is. But I remember in the museum, speaking about cranial deformation and the look feel of the gods, they had a whole display about how the Incan people would come to Tiwanaku and they would imitate the gods. So they would do the cranial deformation to push their forehead back and try to bulb out the back of their head. You can only do it with as much capacity as your cranium has. But they made a very good case that all the Incan royalty was really trying to depict themselves as these elongated gods that they probably still worshipped and mated with. And that's who the pre-Incan were, who built Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. So just more food for thought there, Michael.
Yes, and I actually just started thinking about something about, we talked about Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and King Tut, and one of the most famous things that they're known for is the one sun faith and worshiping the sun. And we think of the sun as the celestial object in the sky, bringing stuff in, the life, like vitamin D that the body needs and stuff. And I started to think about it for a second and going, wait a minute, though. If you look at what the sun is, it's a star. Could they have been saying we're from the stars and saying we traveled here through the sun from wherever they came from? Because there are photos where it looks like craft are using the sun to travel.
Right. And the sun always plays into the whole notion of our solar system. Did you ever read Zecharia Sitchin's book, The 12th Planet?
I read some of it, but I put it down and meant to get back to it and got sidetracked, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it's about Nibiru having this long, oblong orbit. But if you do the math, where are the 12 planets? There's really only 9 planets if you include Pluto. But in the book, he made the point of saying the ancients looked at the moon as a star, as a planet, and also the sun as a planet. And so that's 11. Then Nibiru, planet X, would be 12. And that was the cosmology of our solar system. And supposedly these Anunnaki live on that planet, and it comes around every, 30,000 years or so. And every time it does, it triggers a pole shift and volcanoes and tsunamis because the gravity force is so great on all the planets. But essentially, Earth is an ocean planet. So we would be very vulnerable. And of course, Earth has a lot of volcanoes and fault lines. And we know that the continents rise and fall and move around. So perhaps that's also why Planet X is called Nemesis, because every time it comes through our inner solar system, it wreaks total havoc on our planet and probably the others.
And I just thought about something interesting is if you look at it the way you were describing, I've read many legends in the ancient times, and even I believe the Hebrews talk about the 13th tribe that's missing, the lost tribe. And if we look at tribe as world, Tiamat would have been the 13th planet. And if it was destroyed and became the belt, then it would be a lost planet or a lost tribe.
Yeah, good point. And if it was that, then they would have origin stories about where they came from too, right?
Right. And it would explain too why we can't, or we're told we can't find any traces of it because it's asteroids floating around. You're not going to find buildings probably still standing, or maybe we could. We just maybe aren't looking, or the right people aren't looking, and they are well aware of, like the moon bases, that there are bases or buildings and structures still in the belts.
Or on the other planets. For example, the Cydonia region of Mars, which incidentally is on the 33rd degree parallel north, which is exactly where the Great Pyramids of Egypt are. Is that a coincidence? I don't really believe in coincidence too much anymore, Michael. What do you think?
I don't either, especially when it comes to like stellar, because there's no way we think of ourselves recently as being exploring in the sky and the stars, but we have the Nazca lines, which are only visible by sky, created in a time when we didn't have flight. So how they did that is a mystery. by what they tell us. And so, yeah, I mean, how are the pyramids built lining up with constellations when, I mean, when you start it, I could see going, yeah, let's line up this with this with this. But as you're building it over time, how do you keep the alignment because stuff moves? And I was shocked going when I went to Egypt because I bought into the story of there's 3 pyramids on Giza's plateau because that's what all the books showed. That's what all the movies showed, TV shows showed. And as I'm standing there, I'm going 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I took my camera and I was like, well, if I take a picture this way, I get all 9. If I take a picture this way, that's what the books are. And so it's really funny to sit there and go, how funny is it that because the people who originally wrote the books focused in this direction, we're told 3. Where if they turned a little to the right, we would have been told 9. And thinking about coincidence, 9 pyramids to 9 planets.
Yeah. I just saw an old interview with Art Bell interviewing John Lear, and I've been looking for this interview because in it they do the John Lear test, and that is if you're the president and they briefed you on everything that was going on, including animal mutilations and human mutilations, all the crash retrieval, the reason they kept it secret. If you were the president of the United States, would you reveal it? And Art Bell said, no, I wouldn't do it. And John Lear said the same. But the reason I brought it up is because they also talked about the Cydonia region in Mars, and John Lear had access to some of the original photos. And he said you could actually see the windows and some of the other building features in the Cydonia region, that it was some kind of ancient civilization that lived there on that 33-degree parallel north in Mars.
You know, it's interesting, too, when we think about we're now discovering all of these ley lines, which are energy lines of the planet. And I can't help wondering, you know, when they were originally designed, how common knowledge that was to having all these structures around the world built on these specific spots.
Yeah.
And how they line up with stars, how they line up to certain climates in an essence of, and I don't mean climate as in like temperature wise, I mean climate as in what people are building and doing, that we have ziggurats, which look like the step pyramids of Egypt. Other pyramids in all over the world we're finding now. China, Japan, I think, has some underwater. There's Bosnia has pyramids, Mexico, and they're all very similar in design. I can't help but go, as we said, you know, being coincidental, how they would be so similar, even though they're oceans apart, miles and mountains apart. There had to be somebody who stopped by and be like, hey, here's the design for this structure. It'll help us, help you. And that's why it's all over. Not, well, yeah, the slaves decided to build this monument to the king or a burial monument that just happens to look like this major structure over here.
Yeah. Too much to be just coincidence. And of course, the pyramids in Egypt, especially the Great Pyramid, still don't know how that was constructed, what all those internal chambers were used for, and what they're still even finding, scanning the Great Pyramid, that there's other chambers that have yet to be discovered. So we're still playing catch up as to what all these pyramids were built for.
We are, and even the pyramids themselves historically are now being rewritten because we're taught a pyramid is a 4 triangle sided object that comes to a point. Now they found out when they looked at photos that a pyramid is not 4-sided, it's 8-sided, that each side has a line down the center. And to be able to build that makes the pyramids even more majestic and more. They had to have help, because how do you build 2 sides that line up that for ages people would never even know was there, until someone finally looked at the sunlight and was like, wait a minute, that shadow shouldn't exist. There's a line there. These are not perfectly flat.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. And the right kind of lighting shadow, you see a line coming down the middle of the Great Pyramid and sections it off into 2 parts per side. But I wonder what they would have looked like when they had the casing stones on there, because maybe it wouldn't have been so pronounced, or maybe it was. It's too bad that they've been ripped apart the way they have. But apparently the top of the Great Pyramid was gold capstone, and that would have made it a conductor. So there's even high-tech applications that the Great Pyramid could have been used for. One, I think, is absolutely proven, is that it's a ram pump, and that is using water and pressure trapped in the chamber. When it releases, it brings up the water table. So you can use it as a pump to irrigate fields, and maybe even to create the pyramids themselves by bringing in water that they could use as a canal, and just snake the canal around the pyramid and float the blocks up to place. And what else? So Giza is also being proposed as being a power plant. Joseph Farrell and Christopher Dunn called the Giza power plant and wrote whole books on it, and
Right.
the evidence they found as to what they were doing. So people have studied the power of pyramids, and even just small ones that you have in your room. You can detect the right kind of equipment that it just focuses energy and sends it up through the top. So clearly there are other usages for these structures. They weren't just burial chambers for pharaohs.
Right, and it's interesting you use the phrase snaking down the pyramid, creating the line to look right, that when you travel across the ocean to Mexico, to Chichen Itza, they have a pyramid where the sun looks like a dragon going down the side, or a snake, you could say snake or dragon, going down. And what's even more incredible is they found if you stand in certain spots, you can clap an echo, even though there's no anything around. And it's like, yeah, they make a point of stopping and showing everybody how the sound changes where you stand around this pyramid, where they watch the sun going down this specific side, like we were saying with the pyramid in Egypt. And that can't be coincidence either.
Yeah, I know the one in Chichen Itza. It's interesting that shadow appears on the equinox dates, not the solstice. So the halfway point between summer and winter solstice. And you can only see it for a couple days right around the solstice date, and it illuminates the shadow of, I think it looks like a dragon too. But all these things that they built into the pyramids, it's just really astonishing how much thought and technology and effort went into building these things. We're still not even sure what they were used for.
Right. And I'm curious because, like, the King's Pyramid, as we call it, had the gold capstone. I keep wondering sometimes if there wasn't like a copper capstone, because copper has a specific frequency and emits and helps things to grow that, would they not have maybe made copper capstones? And that's why the Nile area is shown as fertile, and now that the capstones are gone, it's desert.
And you've heard of Robert Schoch. He was an archaeologist and geologist who was looking at the weathering patterns on the Great Sphinx and has conclusively determined that the Sphinx was created much, much longer time ago than Egyptologists give it credit for, at a time when the Sahara Desert was a jungle and the water was flowing over the Sphinx and left these deep carvings that could have only been created by water. As he said, the Sahara is a vast desert now. There's nothing, no water there that could do it in the last few centuries. So it must be very old.
Right. And what's interesting is Giza is right behind the Sphinx, and at the base of the Sphinx are rings that they say were for boats to tie up to. And so you were mentioning the water, and bringing the water in and floating the rocks or stones to the pyramid. Maybe, that's how they really did do it, is because the Sphinx was underwater, that they could sail it up to that plateau and unload them and didn't have to carry them as far. And I can't help wondering if Afghanistan, having the giants that they found, if it really was giants who put that together, and because they could easily lift those stones and set them, and were creating something for their culture, and we just took it over and said, oh, we built that. And because that's kind of what historians do, is when they don't know where something was built, they go, hey, look at this image. That looks like somebody moving a rock. We built it. It's like, nah, that's not necessarily what that means.
I've actually got some images of hieroglyphics of giants moving stones. They have them in some of the temples where you find pictographs or petroglyphs, but they're carrying them right under their arms and bringing them up to the construction site. Because you're right, if someone is 10 or 12 feet tall, they would be able to lift some of these megalithic blocks quite easily. Just think in the same way a little toddler wouldn't be able to lift a cinder block, but you and I could lift it with 2 fingers.
Right.
So the bigger you get, the easier it is to move these big stones. And finally, who's to say that the gravity wasn't different on Earth many thousands of years ago? I mean, look at the dinosaurs. How were they able to exist with such huge body mass unless the gravity wasn't as strong as it is today?
Right, because we look at, and I'm not saying, our building technology is better or worse now, but, you get semis on roads, and after a while, the cement breaks. Dinosaurs were like, what, 5-6 times the weight of a semi, but yet our ground is solid and flat. So, yeah, I would say unless the dino fell and created the Grand Canyon and a lot of those, the gravity would have to have been different to counter the mass.
Yeah, for sure. And then it would have been easier to make these big megalithic structures too, that we're still puzzling over how they could have moved such massive stones, how they could fit them together too. And when you go to South America, it's just amazing. It's like they melted them into place. They're so well fitted. And you never see chisel marks either, Michael. That's the other really amazing thing about some of these megaliths around the world. In fact, my conference presentation is called The Giants of Prehistory and the Mystery of the Megaliths. And I try to make a case that they had a hand in the making of a lot of these structures, the really old ones.
All right. And would you say Easter Island had giants? Because all those statues that we thought were just heads, they're now finding are full-bodied.
Yeah.
They were buried in the ground. And I wonder if weight caused them to get buried, or if the giants knew, maybe we're being hunted, and so they were like, hey, if we were going to live here, we got to hide who we are, and buried them themselves so that people, when they saw them, would be like, oh, look, there's a head looking over that way.
Yeah. It's our friend Jeff.
Yeah, instead of going, hey, there's giants over there, because look at those statues.
Well, you've heard of the terracotta soldiers in Xi'an, China?
Yes.
Thousands of these clay sculptures, and every one is completely unique. Every one is its own face, its own body type, its own armor, and whatever weapons they were carrying. So maybe the Easter Islands were like the terracotta soldiers. Each one was individual, and each one represented another person.
Right, and the other thing that's interesting is when they look at the terracotta soldiers, there's like very few lines where it looks like material fused onto material, that they all look so seamless, and they're like, even they can't do that today. And the same thing with the Easter Island, everything being without seams. I can't help but look at and think about the crystal skulls that have no chisel marks, and going, could those skulls be connected to the giants who were able to create all these megalithic structures and statues and everything that is seamless?
Yeah, it's just the mysteries just keep going on and on and on. Wow. Well, this hour seemed to have gone by pretty quick, Michael.
It did.
It's always interesting interview when the time goes by like that. So
I agree. And so where can people find you, or where are you going to be coming up anytime soon? Any big events you want to share out?
Yeah, I just finished a whole bunch of conferences, from Contact the Desert to MUFON Symposium in Texas where you were at, and I was just up Mount Shasta last weekend. Now I'm on my way to Miami for the Conscious Awards. Billy and Elizabeth Carson put that on, and my show on Forbidden Knowledge is nominated. I would be host of the year. So I'm going there for the award ceremony. Wish me luck. Hopefully I'll win the top prize. And then I got a bunch of conferences coming up in October.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the nomination.
Oh, thank you. 2 will be in Sedona and 1 in Las Vegas in October. That kind of rounds it out. And then I'm already booking for next year. But I also produced the How Weird Street Fair. That'll be September 21st in San Francisco. And might pop into Burning Man again this year. So, yeah, I'm traveling a lot these days. It's kind of nice to do a trip that's for fun instead of just a conference. But if people want to follow my conference schedule and other projects that I'm up to, you can go to bradolsen.com, just the way my name is spelled. And also CCC Publishing is my book publishing website. And there people can check out my books. I've written 10. I published a whole bunch of other authors, including Michael Jaco, Laura Eisenhower, Leo Lyons-Zagami, Lon Milo Duquette, and several others. So go to cccpublishing.com and you can check out all my books. And if you order off the website and it's one of my books, then I can sign that copy for you. So kind of an added perk. If
that makes it worth it right there.
That's the only place to get it done. That and at conferences, I sign books for people.
Yeah. And I have to reiterate, I know I said it in the intro, but people, if you get the chance to meet Brad, he is one of the most humble and approachable people I have met at a conference. And so if you get a chance, and he's not busy, say hi.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to approach him because he was on the stage and feel like, people on stage don't like to be approached. Some don't, but some do.
Yeah. No, I'm usually at my book table talking to people and signing books. So it's comfortable for me. But you're right. Some speakers don't like to be approached or spoken to, but that's their choice. That's their prerogative.
And if you get a chance, do get Brad's books. They are really well written, and the images go really well with the text. So you get a clear picture and understanding of what information he's sharing with you.
Yep. Yeah. Well, great. Again, thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be on your second season now.
Yes.
Your initial guest on the first one.
Right. And I have to say, I was talking with Brad backstage before we started that after my episode with him, it kind of boosted my confidence and gave me the strength and courage to keep going with this show. And so I kind of can say where I'm at today, I can say is partly due to the inspiration I got from my first guest, Brad Olsen.
Oh, well, that's kind of you to say that, Michael. Of course, unintended consequences. I'm just happy to jump on and do a good talk with you. And if that's what kept you going, well, that's great. Happy to hear that.
Yes, and look forward to more episodes with you. And I know guests that know you from the first episode where we talked about Antarctica are most likely chomping at the bit going, when is Brad going back to Antarctica?
I might be going back. I have got a venture capital company called VC Cross, who is actively raising money for a film project, and I would head that up and head back down there. So if we can get the stated goal, what we need to book a trip down there and bring a film crew, I'm all over it. I'd go back, but this time I'd like to fly down. The Drake Passage pretty much kicked my ass. That was good enough one time.
Right. But I will say on behalf of me, if you need someone to carry a bag, I will volunteer.
All right. Good to know, Michael. Well, thanks so much, man. Great talking to you again, and best regards to Jeff Rennell and E-Talk team. Everybody over there working behind the scenes to make your show happen. It's good work they're doing.
Yes, I do appreciate them. And I'm curious, I do have one thing I like to ask, one kind of last question to sum up the show is, from your life experiences and everything you have gone through, what is one golden nugget you would love to leave the audience with on this episode going into the future?
Sure. Well, I would say to get out there and travel, to go to these places. So if you found what we were talking about tonight interesting about the pyramids, book a trip to Egypt. But it's not the only pyramid site in the world. You can go to other ones. I was just at a conference in May at Journey to Truth, and we went out to the Cahokia Mountains. That's an earthen pyramid. So a lot of these places are right in our backyard. And some of the other books I wrote were on sacred places around the world, sacred places in Europe, and also sacred places in North America. And you'd be surprised how many are just right there in your own backyard. And people just, once they find out that they can do not even a day trip, just a couple hours to go see them, it'll help people expand their knowledge base and their understanding of a lot of these places that we talked about tonight. So my one piece of advice is get out there and travel. If you're young enough to carry a backpack around, then go do it. But if you got to pay for a group tour or even a cruise, it's still pretty cool experience.
It is. And talking about traveling, it kind of sparked a memory that you started out writing a travel book. So did you see writing the travel book to today? Did you see that coming?
No, no, because I pivoted into UFO and esoteric and other different topics when I changed over from being a travel writer to being esoteric subject matter.
Well, I can say on behalf of the awakened, not the woke, the awakened people of the planet, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, thank you for doing what you're doing, Michael. And again, thanks for having me on the show. It was a real pleasure. And yeah, we'll have to do it again someday.
Yes, and thank you to everyone in the chat room. Thank you to Brad for coming on again. And to everyone that's watching, have a blessed day, blessed evening, blessed night. And to kind of put a twist on what Brad mentioned, go and travel and see the places for yourself and do your own homework and experience for yourself what we're talking about and see if you come up with the same conclusion or another theory, in which case let us know what that is, and who knows, we may share your theory on a future episode.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, well, great. Let's wrap it here, and I'll talk to you again sometime.
Yes, and have a blessed night, Brad, and a blessed trip where you are, and a great journey on all your future endeavors.
Thank you very much. Good seeing you again.
Good seeing you.
Good
night, everyone.